Hello my creative critters, and welcome to Sketching with Sarah. I'm Sarah, and today I wanted to share a fun project that I recently did. I came across an artist and creator, Monika, on Instagram. Her Instagram handle is @saltandpaperca. And first of all, how clever is that name? She creates completely custom and hand-carved rubber stamps. And after watching some of her videos, I was so inspired to try it myself. Seeing her videos on Instagram sparked some inspiration in me and reminded me of carving MDF board in my printmaking class in college. And I remember spending hours and hours just enjoying the process and how therapeutic and satisfying carving was. I also remember how rewarding printing that design onto paper was once I finished all of the carving. So seeing Monika carving into rubber instead of MDF board, I really wanted to try it, and I figure I have some experience with chisels and it might be cool to try it out on a new medium. I guess my mindset was, how hard can it be? And I was up for a challenge no matter what the outcome was. I've never made a rubber stamp before, and I didn't know where to start as far as supplies to get, and was so happy that she actually offers a rubber stamp starter kit, and I'll be showing you everything that comes in it on the screen as I'm talking, and it's the perfect amount of supplies to get you started. I will definitely leave a link to that in my description along with her social media so you can follow her or get the starter kit so you can make your own rubber stamp. My favorite item in this kit is probably the cute little stitched book to practice stamping in, and the little zine booklet that has some useful tips and instructions on how to use everything. And for a beginner like me, it was very, very helpful. So once I got my hands on this starter box, I started to think about what I wanted to make a stamp of. Since I've been starting to sell some stickers in my shop, I love personalizing every order with a little doodle or some kind of personal message. Every order really means a lot to me, and even if it's just a couple stickers, I have a lot of fun packaging it up and adding some goodies in there too. And since for some reason, like with everything, if I'm going to try a new art supply, I'm going to make it as complicated as possible, but I had an existing design that I actually used as part of a little animation that I started a while ago as an intro to my YouTube videos that I just never finished. But the animation is of two of my little fairies holding a pencil and swimming around my Sketching with Sarah typeface. And I guess I'll link a video above or in the description if you want to see what I have so far for that animation. I don't think I've touched that in years, so I'm not sure if it'll ever get done, but after learning a little bit of frame-by-frame animating in a college class, I thought I would be ambitious and try to do that. And I've done simple animations, like on Twitch, if somebody donates or something, I have a little fairyal, like, yay, happy animation with little hearts and stuff that was really cute. But I can do simple stuff like that. Anyway, one of the frames that I liked from that animation was her holding a little pencil and all happy looking, and I thought it would be perfect. It would be like the fairyal wrote thank you on the envelope or in the card in your order or something. In hindsight, the details in the face, the paws, the arms, and the pencil that she's holding were just way too small for the carving tool provided. And I think I'm going to either try this again, but make the drawing bigger, or modify it so there's not so many lines so close together. I actually use this exact frame of the same animation in my Patreon icon for my fairyal tier on there, and I just created a Photoshop document with the dimensions of the rubber stamp sheet that was provided in the kit and sized that design onto that size of the rubber to kind of get an idea of what would fill the space on there and what would make the most sense so I don't waste too much of the rubber stamp. And then once I printed it out, I tweaked the tail so that I could write thank you in the negative space to add a bit more of a handmade and personal feel. So once I got the design how I liked it, I followed the directions step by step in Monika's zine that, like I said, was included in the kit, which was so easy to understand. But I'll just briefly explain here that I traced the design that I was happy with onto the tracing paper that was in the kit. Then I used the round nubby part of my Sharpie to transfer the pencil side down onto the rubber sheet. In the instructions, she used a spoon to transfer the drawing, but I was just too lazy to go get one, and I think anything with a smooth, blunt tip gives the same effect. You don't want to use a pencil or anything like that to go over the lines to transfer the drawing, because then you risk scratching or indenting onto the rubber stamp, which is not what you want. And since the design is backwards on the stamp, when I stamp it, it'll be the right way, if that makes sense. And after I transfer the design onto the rubber sheet, I followed one of the tips that she suggested and used the smallest chisel. Is it called a chisel? I guess it's called a gouge tool, and that makes sense since you're kind of gouging the fleshy rubber rather than chiseling and chipping wood. Anyway, I used the smallest gouging tool and just tried to outline one part at a time and decided to start with the spine fin thing on my Therial's back. I thought it was the least intimidating and the perfect place to warm up and kind of get the hang of these new tools. Also, as a side note, the little red dot on my left hand is from going to my local flea market over that weekend. And that's the stamp you can get when you leave in case you want to come back later, so you don't have to pay the entry fee again. No one asked, but in case you noticed and were wondering, there you go. So as I started carving, I noticed that I started by holding it more like a pencil. Then I realized when I was chiseling into the MDF board in my printmaking class, I held it a lot differently, where I kind of had more of my fingers on the top of the tool, directing and sliding it with a little bit of a downward pressure instead of dragging it along like you would with a pencil. And I'm realizing as I'm scripting this video, it's really hard to explain this stuff, so I really encourage you to try this for yourself and just experiment and have fun with it. There is definitely a learning curve, even if you've done this kind of thing before. One tip that I found that was super helpful is that with these gouging tools, it's important to not let the spiky little teeth on the top edge of the gouge throat thing. You don't want those little tips to go under the rubber or it will rip and you'll lose that precise line that you're trying to carve. I almost learned that the hard way a few times, so I'm glad that tip was mentioned in the directions that were in the kit so I can keep an eye on that and keep reminding myself to make sure that those little nibs stay above the surface. So the main idea when creating a rubber stamp is that you want all of those black pencil lines that are on the drawing to stay on that rubber because that's what you want to be the most raised part of the whole stamp so that the ink that you apply onto it touches that. So obviously when you stamp it, that's what gets put on the paper. I'm sure you guys understand what stamps are, but I just feel like since I'm already over-explaining everything, anyway, I might as well go all out. And as I started carving more and more, I realized how much different this was than carving into wood or the MDF board. Instead of in wood, where wherever you chisel, given that your blade is sharp enough, it's kind of easy to control exactly where you want to carve. Don't get me wrong, it still takes a lot of patience and practice. But with the rubber sheet, it just flexes so much, so you kind of have to really work with it. It was definitely a different experience, but it was an overall satisfying challenge. The starter kit included 3 different sizes and shaped gouge nibs, and each of them was helpful in different specific areas. For the line art and just trying to get the original design into the rubber initially, I started with the smallest V tip to just carve the little details around the small lines. And then I used the largest flat U-shaped gouge tip to really dig out those larger areas, and the larger V gouge tip to get into those more sharp corners that led into the larger areas of negative space where I used that flat U-shaped one again. When I first started, I really thought that I would just carve one whole part of a design and then move on to another and then change the nib depending on what I needed as I moved through the whole thing. But I realized I was just too lazy for that, so I decided to do everything that I could with the smallest tip, change it out to the larger V tip, did everything that I thought I could with that, and then change it out for the largest flat U tip. And I found that worked out better for me, so I was changing out the nibs less frequently. They are pretty easy to put in and out, but when you get into the zone and you start to build momentum, having to stop and change the tip so frequently kind of gets you out of the zone again. And once I got into it, I really enjoyed the process and how satisfying cutting and carving and slicing into it was. Maybe that's why I like watching those candle carving and the condensed sand slicing videos when they pop up on my feed in social media. If you know the types of videos that I'm talking about, and you like to watch them too, you might really like carving into rubber too. If you're going to try and make a rubber stamp, I would recommend starting with something more simple though, and not drive yourself crazy like I did in the more condensed areas of this design. So I'm going to take a brief pause blabbing at you here, and let's just hang out with some music and get through this carving adventure, and I'll meet you back here in a bit to explain the next step once I get that main design fleshed out, literally. still being here. I hope you are enjoying watching the carving. I love just taking my time with it, and the hardest part, I think, was for sure the face, paws, pencil area with the eyes shut and the nose and the tooth. All that detail was so condensed in there, and some of it ended up accidentally being carved out. But I think that's just something that I have to embrace more about rubber stamps, is that it's not supposed to be super precise and detailed, at least not with the skill level that I am right now. With more practice, I hope to get better and learn what I can and can't do with the tools that I have. But I really enjoy learning along the way. So now that I have everything carved up, I took my sharp scissors and cut the border to make the stamp shape. I really should have used an X-Acto knife like was suggested in the instructions, but honestly, I was just too lazy to find where I put mine, and I would definitely need a new blade wherever I ended up finding it. And then I would have to find my cutting mat. And was I just impatient and wanted to start stamping? Yes, I was. So I cut out the border and was so eager to start inking up my stamp and getting my first stamp test on paper. This really was the moment of truth, and I was so excited. I mean, I spent hours on this thing and I was just ready to stamp. So I used the cute little tiny ink pad that came in the kit, and I just started patting away onto the stamp, and right away I noticed some areas that I needed to deepen the cuts. Like, for example, in the outermost borders of the whole thing, there were some lines that needed to go down farther so that it wouldn't also stamp onto the paper when I applied ink to it. So while the ink was still applied, I started to carefully, quote-unquote, erase those unwanted ink marks with the gouging tool. I won't lie, the first stamp that I tried to put on paper, I wasn't super satisfied with it, so I went in even more and tried to clean up and thin out some of those lines, and tweaked until I either cut too much or I was fine with it. I really think I ended up overworking it though, and like in the paws, one of the lines is gone, and honestly I just don't think the tool that I was using was small enough to get that detailed, or my design just wasn't big enough, so I kind of set myself up for failure in those tighter areas. Like, I had no business thinking that I could get those lines that go down the pencil, or the little lines that go perpendicular to the pencil for that metal part holding the eraser in, let alone the little tiny tooth in the mouth of the ferrule. So a lot of the design elements in the original drawing I had to simplify, or just simply weren't going to make it into the final stamp. So after a few more rounds of test stamping, carving, and stamping and carving, I actually did a few rounds of these off camera so I could really focus. I figured this is as good as it's gonna get, and I even cleaned off the ink a couple times so I could really see where the ink was and where the ink was still not how I wanted it. And with a stamp this big, I think I'm going to get a larger juice pad or ink pad and also glue the stamp to a wooden block, because it was a little bit more challenging to get an even layer throughout of the ink. And when I was pressing it, getting an even pressure and making sure that I didn't push down too hard and I didn't smudge when I was picking up the stamp after I put it down. Those were other challenges that I think just adding a flat backing to it and having a larger ink pad might solve those problems. I also noticed that the little ink pad that came with the kit also had kind of a fuzzy surface, which makes sense so that the ink can soak into it. But sometimes the little fibers would add excess ink into the carved out areas. And when I pressed too hard onto the stamp onto the paper, the carved areas smudged a little bit. Basically, I came across a lot of challenges, and with practice and from what I learned from creating this rubber stamp, I know the next one that I make will just get better and better from the one before. And I think that's the cool thing about art. For the final result, I did end up taking a black ink pen, and I just filled in some areas that I sliced up too much on accident, and I added the little handwritten thank you, and I'm pretty happy with it. I learned a lot, and I still have about over half of the rubber in this kit left, so I'm excited to try this design, but maybe a bit bigger or a little bit more simplified based on what I learned from this one, or just make a completely new design and keeping all of those challenges in my mind while I'm drawing it. But let me know what you think, and if you've ever carved your own rubber stamp before. Huge thank you to Monika or Salt and Paper CA on Instagram for inspiring me to create something new, and like I said, I will be leaving her links to all of her social media and her shop in my description, so So please check out her work and what she has to offer. She has so many how-to videos and tips that I didn't share here too, so definitely go check out her Instagram. Thank you guys so much for being here, and don't forget to like this video if you liked it, and let's chat in the comments. I love replying to every one of you. It really makes my day when I see a comment on my videos. Anyways, thank you so much for watching, stay creative, and I will see you in next Friday's video.